What's up, B2 capital G here. So today I want to tell you guys an absolutely amazing story. In fact, now that I think about it, I think it's one of my favorite stories. It's the story of the only Shonen Jump championship in history where Elemental Hero Stratos was not only legal, but was completely unlimited and you could run 3 copies. Let's take ourselves back to the GX era. We all know that E-Heroes were supposed to be the defining shining superstars of their generation. Jaden used them on the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime. And even by today's standards, they have a lot more support cards than most archetypes in the game. But pre-Stratos, E-Heroes sucked, and I mean they sucked badly. The archetype was essentially a bust, and as hard as this might be to believe, because of their later dominance at Shonen Jump Championship events, Destiny Heroes were in the same position. Each archetype was a bunch of decent to good cards, but with no real guidance or a tangible win condition. Opening hands were clunky, and Elemental Heroes especially lacked power cards that could grant them a lot of advantage or significant board presence. A lot of that changed with the creation of Elemental Hero Stratos, the hero that basically did and had it all. Great stats, searchable, helped out multiple archetypes, and even had multiple amazing effects because why not? This guy was essentially the all might of Yu-Gi-Oh! After the months and years post Stratos' release, it would be relatively easy to see how he'd become the defining monster of the entire GX era and how great the card really was. But during the weeks leading up to the February 2007 release, there were a decent amount of skeptics in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community. I remember thinking to myself, what's the big deal about this Stratos guy? He's basically just a big gadget, right? How can this Airblade Turbo be all that good when D and E heroes have sucked forever? And boy, were my doubts ever proven wrong, tenfold. We know thanks to years of competitive events and the results that Stratos even at 1 can make one hell of an impact, but with the card at 3, it was more like an unstoppable force, to be honest. The metagame was in a pretty interesting place. We had Control Monarchs as a strong tier 1 contender, but make no mistake, this was a time in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where machines definitely ruled the world. Some chose OTK Chimera Tech super aggressive versions, others leaned towards decks that were kind of more control based and were focused around cards like Cyber Phoenix, UFO Turtle, and Dekochi. Lastly, of course, there were the gadgets, which were incredibly strong. 3 different machine variants as solid tier 1 contenders, and all had actually made the top 8 of the previous Shonen Jump Orlando just 1 month prior. One of the reasons machines had overtaken Monarchs as the dominant deck was really because of their inherent resistance to targeting from spells and traps. You see, GX was a lot different than today's Yu-Gi-Oh! Targeting was a very big deal back then. Snatch Steal, Ring of Destruction, Sakuretsu Armor, Brain Control, Soul Exchange, Book of Moon, Enemy Controller. Cyber Phoenix not only laughed at all of these cards, but it did even more than that. It protected all of your machines in your entire deck from these cards as well. A machine variant not only won Shonen Jump Orlando, but it took 6 spots in the top 8. So machines were definitely going into our next event with a ton of momentum. And this leads me to the heart of our story, the perfect still image frozen in time that showcases the best of Stratos' impact. Shonen Jump St. Louis 2007. We were still in an age, as I just described, where Monarchs and machines were both extremely dominant. After all, Control Monarch variants were always in the Shonen Jump top 8s and were a legitimate threat to take any event, while machines in some shape or another had won our previous 2 Shonen Jump championships, STEIN and Chimera Tech Overdragon OTKs getting the job done. There was one major question that everybody expected to be answered by the end of this event, and that question was simple. Just how good was Elemental Hero Stratos? After a long and grueling day 1, we finally received our answer, and that answer was pretty damn stunning, especially for the cynical players out there like myself. The day 2 top 8 saw 5 competitors running the big guy. Keep in mind, for all you newer players out there, during the GX days, only 8 players made it to day 2. This was incredible because Stratos had only been legal for a single day in the TCG, and yet it had managed to have over half of the finalists played in their deck. This was insane, especially for its debut at a Shonen Jump Championship. This was completely unheard of, but even more impressive, it wasn't just the expected Airblade Turbo in the top 8, but also Jeff Jones using an incredibly innovative control beatdown deck that used Stratos as an easy way to make advantage while he pressed to simplify the game state as quickly as possible. Jeff used cards like Smashing Ground and Sekiretsu Armor to easily deal with his opponent's monsters, while at the same time allowing him to push for damage and take cards from his opponent's hand potentially, as he used 2 copies of Don Zalug and Spirit Reaper as well. We also saw soon-to-be U.S. National Champion and multiple Shonen Jump winner Chris Bowling make top 8 as well, using a Machine Beatdown / BAZOO Return hybrid deck that used 3 copies of Stratos in the main deck as well, because, as I stated earlier, why not? Chris's deck was more focused around OTK and dealing big amounts of damage as soon as possible. It was pretty much par for the course for Machine players to run things like Future Fusion, Overload Fusion, and Limiter Removal in the main, but Chris combined that with the BAZOO theory. The BAZOO theory helped Iman Ganin win a Shonen Jump championship in Chris's home state of Texas just 8 months earlier, and the core concept was built around this: getting a bunch of monsters into the graveyard, which could be done with Snipe Hunter or Future Fusion, banishing them all for BAZOO, who would jump up to 2500 attack, and then use all of those monsters with Dimension Fusion or Return from a Different Dimension to bring them back at once and just KO your opponent before they even knew what happened to them. It was because of decks like these and the other 3 Airblade Turbo that managed to make it into the top 8 at the Shonen Jump Championship that people legitimately started asking the question if Stratos had already become, in a vacuum, the strongest card in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh! It only made sense to run him in Airblade, but if you're wondering why he was being splashed at 3 in non-Destiny and Elemental Hero decks, and why it was actually working on the highest level of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh!, it's simply because Stratos was too good not to run. This takes us to the 3 Airblade Turbo decks that made it to the top 8 at the Shonen Jump. In hindsight, if I was maybe a smarter duelist during the GX era, I would have realized that this was the easy favorite for the event, because the deck was damn near unbeatable in the OCG when it was at full power. Carlo Perez, who ultimately would win Shonen Jump Championship St. Louis, was, in my opinion, not the best player in the top 8, but I'm not sure that that mattered all that much, because Airblade Turbo was going to win this event one way or another. Not only was the finals an Airblade Turbo mirror match, but the deck that really showcased the gap in power between Airblade Turbo and all of its competition at this event was really the semifinals, where Carlo obliterated another Shonen Jump champion, Andrew Fadella, and his Monarch control deck 2-0 in under 20 minutes. Keep in mind, and this is the scary part, neither one of those duels even went past turn 8. Following the event, the March 2007 ban list would rightfully put Elemental Hero Stratos at limited status, which of course would kill any possibilities of Airblade Turbo defending its title, but we all know that Airblade Turbo was destined to be reborn again as the legendary Diamond Dude Turbo. This doesn't take away from the fact that Shonen Jump St. Louis definitely proved 2 things. Number 1, Elemental Hero Stratos was 100% the card that it was hyped up to be, and number 2, it was strong enough to not only make the lackluster Destiny Hero archetype respectable, but they won a Shonen Jump immediately and would go on to dominate the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! For years. So let me know what you guys thought of this story, and of course, if you guys really did enjoy the story, please give the video a big thumbs up. I really like this story because, especially as an old school player, you know, I think back to the days of GX and like the first half of 5Ds, and Stratos is kind of like an icon for me. I mean, he was the face of Yu-Gi-Oh! During like the GX era and like the first half of 5Ds, where, you know, he was the card that you always wanted to normal summon first, and Teledad and Dad Return and Perfect Circle Monarchs and T-Hero and so many different decks. He even found his way into Gladiator Beast, for God's sakes, where, you know, he would search Prisma and whatnot. But it's kind of more than that. We all know Stratos is like this powerhouse card that can kind of define the game, but many people don't know what happened when he was actually legal at 3 for just a millisecond, and how amazing that card really was back then, man. You had so many decks that weren't even Destiny E-Hero or E-Hero base that just said, we'll throw Stratos in it because he was so powerful. And it's crazy because the card was only out for a single day and he became the most powerful card in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Basically overnight. You know, he warped the format where there were all of these machine decks dominating the game, and they went from having 6 top 8 spots to having 0 top 8 spots, essentially. It was kind of crazy. So anyways, let me know what you guys thought of this story. If you enjoyed it, give the video a big thumbs up. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on those notifications for daily videos.